I learned how disposable I was the night my husband's family decided my son and I were a problem to be solved, not people. And I realized too late that I'd walked into a room where the outcome was already decided. My name is Maren Cole. I'm 34. And the stakes that night were simple and brutal. Keep my child included in the only family he had left. Or watch him learn how quietly adults can erase you. We were seated around a long cherrywood table in a split-level house outside Fort Collins. The kind with beige walls and framed vacation photos, meant to signal stability, when the temperature in the room dropped without anyone touching a thermostat. It wasn't shouting or anger that did it, but the careful way everyone avoided looking directly at me, like eye contact might obligate them to explain themselves. Tara, my brother-in-law's wife, cleared her throat and stood up as if she were about to make a toast, smiling politely in the way people do when they're about to say something cruel and want credit for being calm about it. She said maybe it would be healthier for everyone if gatherings were smaller from now on, less complicated. And then she looked straight at me like she'd finally decided to stop pretending. No one interrupted her. No one asked what she meant. They all knew. My son Mateo came up from the downstairs rec room right then, socked feet slapping against the steps, clutching a plastic dinosaur and grinning because he thought dessert was coming. He stopped when he saw the faces, looked at me, then at the adults, and asked why everyone was being weird. I felt something in my chest fracture quietly as I pulled him closer and told him everything was fine. Because parents lie like that when the alternative is letting a child see the exact moment they're unwanted. I thanked them for dinner, because politeness is a reflex when you've spent years trying not to inconvenience anyone. And I walked us toward the door without waiting to be dismissed. No one followed us. No one said his name. That silence didn't start that night though. It had been growing for years, stretching back to when Sundays meant laughter and overcooked burgers, and my husband Jonah flipping patties in his parents' backyard, while the kids chased each other through the sprinklers. Back then, his mother Ruth hovered with napkins and unsolicited advice. His father Glenn told the same stories every week, and Jonah stood in the middle of it all, like gravity itself. I didn't need to earn my place then, because loving him was enough. The accident changed that math. One icy morning on a mountain highway, a delivery van drifted across lanes, and Jonah didn't come home, and suddenly I was no longer a wife but a reminder. At first they showed up with casseroles and condolences and promises that Mateo would always be one of them. They said family doesn't disappear just because someone dies. Then the visits shortened. Then they stopped asking how I was holding up. Then invitations came with conditions. Times changed last minute. Conversations went quiet when I entered rooms. I told myself grief made people awkward, that I was imagining things, that it was my job to be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion we were offered. Mateo wasn't imagining it though. He noticed birthdays forgotten and texts unanswered, and cousins who stopped inviting him to play online games. So when Tara messaged me out of nowhere saying dinner might be good for everyone, I said yes, even though my stomach tightened the moment I read it. Mateo jumped around the living room when I told him, already planning which dinosaur to bring. I wanted that joy back for him so badly that I ignored the warning bells. We arrived early that evening, the house too clean, the air thick with lemon cleaner and restraint, like a place staged for inspection rather than family. Ruth nodded at me from the kitchen without smiling. Glenn waved without standing, and Tara spoke to me like a guest who might overstay her welcome. I helped set the table because having something to do felt safer than standing still. Conversations stopped and started around me, never including me, always resuming the second I stepped away. When we finally sat down, Mateo laughed with his cousins at the side table, unaware that the adults had already decided what he represented. I watched their hands tighten around forks and glasses, watched them exchange looks that didn't include me, and understood with sudden clarity that this dinner wasn't about reconnection at all. It was about permission. Permission to say what they'd been thinking since Jonah died. Permission to push us out without calling it cruelty. And as Tara inhaled like she was about to continue, I realized the night wasn't over yet, and whatever came next would change more than just where we spent our Sundays. The evening kept unraveling in quieter ways after that realization, with Tara directing the flow of food and conversation so smoothly that it took me a few minutes to notice how every small kindness stopped just short of my place. She refilled Mateo's glass before it was empty and reminded him gently to chew with his mouth closed, then let my plate sit bare until I reached across the table myself. Work trips and home renovations filled the air, stories looping around me like I was a coat draped over a chair, present but not counted. I nodded at the right moments and kept my voice light when spoken to, because I knew how to survive rooms that wanted me quiet. Glenn finally shifted his chair closer and passed the bread without being asked, murmuring that it was good for Mateo to be around family. And the word family landed like a weight rather than a comfort. I thanked him and felt my throat tighten, because even that small gesture stood out too sharply against everything else. For a moment, I convinced myself this was just awkwardness and old grief, that one decent night might soften whatever had hardened between us. After dessert, the kids disappeared again. Chairs scraped back, coffee cups replaced plates, and the room took on the tense stillness of people waiting for something unnamed. Tara stood and tapped her spoon against her mug with practiced ease, smiling as if she were doing everyone a favor by addressing the silence. She said she didn't want things to feel uncomfortable anymore, and spoke about honesty like it was a gift she'd been saving. No one interrupted her as she explained that gatherings had felt strained lately, that emotions lingered, that maybe not everyone was ready for things to go back to how they were. I felt every gaze slide away from me as she suggested a simple solution, framed as fairness rather than exclusion. She asked for a show of hands, just to see what everyone felt, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Hands rose slowly, one after another, each movement careful and irreversible, until the pattern was clear even without counting. Ruth's hand went up first, then Glenn's, then others. I barely knew well enough to remember their birthdays. I stayed very still, watching it happen, because shock has a way of freezing the body while the mind races. Mateo appeared in the doorway then, clutching a toy car, his smile fading as he took in the raised arms and the heavy quiet. He tugged at my sleeve and asked why everyone was doing this, his voice low and confused, and something inside me split cleanly in two. I squeezed his hand, stood slowly and thanked them for dinner with a steadiness that surprised even me. As we walked past, Glenn rose halfway from his chair and whispered that it wasn't right, but he didn't follow us. The drive home was silent, Mateo watching the streetlights slide by while I gripped the wheel hard enough to ache. Later, after he fell asleep curled against my side, I lay awake replaying the night frame by frame, hearing Tara's calm voice, and seeing those hands lift again. I thought about the small things I'd ignored over the years, the missed calls, the vague messages, the way invitations always came late, or not at all. I remembered a voicemail Tara once left by mistake, her voice casual as she said things felt easier without me around, and how I told myself it meant nothing. Lying there, I finally understood that my silence hadn't protected Mateo or me. It had only made their erasure easier. The next morning, I watched my son eat cereal and draw pictures like nothing had happened, and the normalcy hurt worse than the night before. While he played outside, I opened my laptop and began searching for answers, not knowing yet what I would do with them. The screen filled with names and options, and just as I clicked on one, my phone buzzed with a message from Ruth asking if we could talk privately, and my stomach dropped. I ended up calling a local attorney whose voice stayed calm no matter how carefully I described the dinner, the raised hands, and the way my son had frozen beside me. She told me people who erase you slowly never expect resistance, and that what I had wasn't drama, it was a documented pattern. We went through the saved messages, the accidental voicemail, the timeline of invitations that dried up, and she framed it not as punishment, but as protection. A few days later, she sent carefully worded letters to Ruth, Glenn, Tara, and the others who had made that choice at the table, outlining the behavior and setting boundaries without threats or theatrics. The morning they arrived, I made Mateo breakfast, packed his bag, and waved as he boarded the bus, then sat alone with my coffee and waited for the fallout that never came. The silence that followed felt different from before, not sharp or anxious, but hollow in a way that meant the pressure had finally lifted. Ruth left a voicemail saying we should talk and that things had gotten out of hand, and I listened once before letting it sit unanswered. Tara sent a single text asking if this was really necessary, then nothing at all. No one argued, no one demanded apologies, and that told me more than any confrontation could have. A week later, the attorney confirmed that no one had challenged the letters, and that compliance, even quiet compliance, still counted. For the first time since Jonah died, I felt like I wasn't bracing myself for the next disappointment. Mateo noticed the change before I named it, asking one night if we were in trouble or if people were mad at us. I told him the truth in language he could carry, that we were safe, and that sometimes adults make choices that don't get to decide our worth. He nodded and went back to his book, already lighter than I had been at his age. Over the following months, our world grew smaller but steadier, filled with routines that belonged only to us. We spent Sundays walking the trail near the reservoir, sharing pastries from the corner shop, and talking about things that didn't need translating. Glenn stopped by once, alone, awkward and quiet, and we spoke kindly without reopening wounds, which was enough for me. The rest of the family stayed away, and what surprised me was how little I missed the version of connection that always required me to shrink. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I'd stayed quiet for so long. Naming the slow exclusion didn't make me angry, it made me clear, and clarity turned out to be gentler than hope ever was. One evening, Mateo asked if they missed us, And I told him that missing someone doesn't matter if you won't treat them well when they're present. He thought about that, then smiled and said he liked our Sundays better anyway. Standing in our kitchen later, watching him laugh over something small, I understood that the night at that table wasn't the end of our family. It was the moment I stopped chasing one that no longer chose us. I didn't lose everything. I lost the illusion that love required endurance without respect. What I gained was quieter, stronger, and finally mine. Looking back, I see now that boundaries don't end relationships. They reveal which ones were real to begin with. If this story resonated with you, consider following along and supporting stories that speak honestly about loss, growth, and self-respect. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from people you once called family to protect yourself or your child?